Flowers Blooming in Our Throats is the latest film by Brussels-based artist and filmmaker Eva Giolo. She is a founding member of IFFR, a production and distribution platform for film and media art in Brussels. Her film, which has its international premiere at IFFR, was commissioned by In Between Art Film for the project Mascarilla 19 Codes of Domestic Violence. Maria Palacios Cruz is a researcher, curator, and writer. She is co-founder of The Visible Press, a London-based imprint for books on cinema and writing by filmmakers. She is a programmer at Punta de Vista and Courtesan, co-programmer of the film series This Machine Kills Bad People at the ICA, and coordinator of the Film Curating Studies Department at Elias Guerrieta Cine Escola in San Sebastián.
Hi, Eva.
Hello.
Your film, Flowers Blooming in Our Throats, I find it so beautiful, but also so troubling. And there's this very subtle violence and troubling beauty, which I think it's already present in the title. There's this idea of flowers blooming in our throats. It's so beautiful and poetic, and it's also so uncomfortable and horrifying at the same time. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, like whilst watching and rewatching the film, this like the sense of how a gesture can move from being caressing and gentle to becoming really violent, and sometimes you do that just within the same shot, and how that like violence in a way, I mean, it's not even brought in progressively. You announce it from the beginning. There is one of the earlier shots is a knife being brought out of a drawer, and for anyone who's like read Chekhov, you know that if like you see a knife at the beginning of a film or a theater play, then that knife will have to be used at some point. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the context of the film, because I think it responds to a very specific brief and a commission, a campaign to highlight domestic abuse during the pandemic. So maybe could you talk about that like wider project and how you responded to it?
Sure. So the project was commissioned by a foundation which is called In Between Art Film, and it was commissioned for that project called Mascarilla 19 on domestic violence. And so, yeah, it was just, at first it was just a very difficult project also, just because of the thematic, but a very important one. And early on, I decided that I didn't want to display any kind of violence on the screen or have any kind of personification, because I found it very important not to. And I really wanted to work on the ambiguity of those gestures. And because that commission was, they commissioned that work after during the lockdown, actually, just in order to also support the production of moving image during the pandemic. And so yeah, I was stuck at home with my partner, and the only thing I could do was I just got a little bit lost in the cleaning and ordering things at home. And I got really interested in the ambiguity of also the notion of home in itself as a place, as a safe place, but as also a place of ambiguity in itself, because it's also obviously a place of where one can be invaded or abused. And so I started the project by also by making a list of all of those gestures that I felt could hold that tension. So my idea was just to really work to actually make this film through the editing process, so that violence would never be on the screen, but would actually could only be imagined. So that it would not be any kind of narrative, but it would just be, those various gestures that would follow one another, and there would just be hands talking to one another. And so it features my own hands, my partner's hands, my family, and also a few of my friends and fellow artists, which are based in Brussels. So I made that list of gestures, and then I filmed each person in their own home doing those daily actions. I don't know if that really.
You know, no, because I had wondered about that. I had wondered about the relationship between, like, say, the choreography of shooting, like all those gestures. And it's funny because while I was watching it, I was also making lists of all the different things that the hands do, and I wondered about the relationship between choreographing the shoot and choreographing the editing, and the structure coming through the edit, because there is a tension that gets built up. But I don't know if you were aware of, or if you could, I mean, I guess you were, but like sensing that tension building up whilst filming the gestures, or if it's very much a construction that happened when you were editing.
No, I think but I think it's in many of my works that actually, the films happen in the editing process very much. But obviously I thought about which kind of images I wanted to collect while shooting the film. But I must say that most of the build-up is also through sound. So I work a lot with restriction, or like a set of codes or rules that I set for myself. I mean, the first one is to work also with 16mm film and with the bolex itself. So it's already a restriction in the way that I look, or like what I actually film, because of the material itself and because it's so expensive. So is there economy of looking, or just really capturing exactly what I want to capture? But then also I had really that strong idea that I really wanted to, it's just because in the first place, every film, it's also a bit of a technical challenge. So I really wanted to try something new for myself with the camera, and I really wanted to work with filters. So the very first idea of the film was also to kind of insert those red filters of different colors. So I made that little collection of something like 25 different shades of red that could be inserted behind the lens. And that would be also in itself within the camera, a gesture, like a violent gesture, or like kind of like the imposition of that color on the image itself. And obviously the filter gets into the camera and takes a certain amount of light away from the image. And for me, since I feel like I very much appear in my film through the editing, that was a way also for me to, since the film it doesn't have a narrative. So I felt like also the cutting of the film, the editing of the film, and then those gestures of inserting the filter would be also that kind of violence towards the film itself. Because many of those gestures, even if they do carry like a sense of tension or ambiguity, many of them are also very much about gesture of love and care, and they're very warm. And it's the middle of the summer. The summer in Brussels was amazing, was so much light. And there's also that sense of like touching one another, which obviously with this pandemic has been such a weird thing. I cannot remember what it is to hold my friends. So it's also the whole process of the film. There's the ambiguity, but there's also a warmth to the film in a sense. I got a little bit lost here. But,
no, but I mean, I think I mean, I wrote to you when I first watched it because the warmth really struck me, and the that warmth of summer, the warmth of the light, I guess, as you say, the warmth of touch. And I also, I guess, was troubled because that warmth, that like light, that beauty, you know, can also be like a mask or something that seduces you and draws you in, and then you know, and then things transform. But I mean, you've said so much there, because I guess there's that question of the sound. I mean, the sound is also very much what suggests movement in the film, because the shots are always static, but the sound is heightened and sudden and suggests this like violent movement or this violent gesture that we don't get to see. And then what you were saying about touch, I mean, I think that's I mean, it's like a really beautiful thing about seeing your film, and it's also a really painful thing, as you say, in this context where we can't touch each other. But then, I mean, that made me think of your you know, previous work of yours, and in particular your previous film, a song called Mother, and the idea of different forms of communication, and communication through language, or like knowledge transmission and production through language, and knowledge transmission through other senses like touch, which is a much more primary form of communication, and it's less abstract than language. And then I thought about how much, I mean, you're saying that the film doesn't have a narrative, but I mean, I think it does have a narrative, and it says so much. And it says so much without using words. I mean, there are no words at all, neither written. I mean, you know, there are the titles at the end where you explain where you shot it. But I think that's so powerful, the idea of communicating just through this very primary experience of touch in an audiovisual medium, because we're not like, you know, we're not receiving your film through touch, you're receiving your film through the eyes. And I feel that that's like a preoccupation, I mean, in your work more widely than just in this project.
Yeah, I think more and more it's something that I'm trying to go away from. I mean, this one really doesn't have any dialogues, but that was also because I was doing then a lot of research and reading, and I felt also it was like a decision which was made very early in the process of this film, that it would not be, I didn't want to use words or a voiceover, because I felt also, I didn't want a narrative in the first place, like in a spoken narrative, and I just really wanted to focus on the image itself. And I wanted it to be, I was not so much interested in telling a story, but more kind of like, I wanted this film to be maybe a feeling, or like an impression, and something very tactile, actually. And yeah, it's moving image, but then that was also the way that we approached the sound with Simon Luca, who worked with me on the sound, with a composer based in Italy. And I just remember telling him, like, I really wanted something that would just be that we would deal with the sound in maybe an unrealistic manner, that the way that you hear what's going on the screen is actually very close to you, and that you would actually have a sense of being there, or like that it's just so close to you. And then we came up with that idea, like basically every time the red filter is entering the camera, then the sound is kind of muted. And so there's also that sense of like duality with the color, or it's also, for me, the red filter is very much about also that notion of memory, of like seeing something a second time under a different light. And the notion of repetition is also just very important in the overall film, because there's many gestures which are being repeated like many times, that they look the same, but they're different. The intensity are different. And that was something with the project that I felt like was very clear from the very beginning, that sense of something circular repeating itself, because that's what, when thinking about violence, that's what it is to me. Something that is not constant, it's something that starts and ends and repeats itself. And that's why also there's that spinning top in the film, which acts as a separation between the different, again, maybe chapter for me in my editing idea of the film, that just like those blocks of different intensity. And there's that repetition that keeps on happening of the gesture, but also, that notion of rhythm.
You were saying how the filter comes in and stops the sound. And I mean, and I guess there is a lot of closing windows as well as one of the repeated gestures. And there is the sound from the outside world. I mean, I guess there is that relationship between this inside world that you build through the editing and in the outside world, which is sort of glimpsed, but like in a way not really graspable. I mean, we see the sky, and it's really beautiful, the contrast between that, like, you know, summer blue sky and the red filter. But then when we see the behinds of houses, but those are like private garden. I mean, there is no way out through the outs. I mean, when we see a garden, it's just a courtyard. And so I guess I think sound contributes very much to that sense of entrapment. But I think you also build this universe that is similar, like, you know, this domestic, I mean, I imagine you shot in different houses, but there is a continuity, or there is a coherence between all these like spaces through the objects, the fruit, the plants, the kitchens, the wood, And so in a way, it almost feels as if all these women are trapped in the same house. And then you trap them with windows and mirrors and lines, and the light also. I mean, in a way, it's funny how, because the light creates these frames within the frame, and at the same time, the light also caresses the hands. So I think there's even ambiguity there in how, So I don't know. I mean, I think in that sense of entrapment was possibly also heightened by the experience of having developed the film whilst being in lockdown yourself.
Yeah. I think it definitely, like that was pretty clear at some point. I was like, well, all of the shots will definitely be inside. We can never go outside. And that was the idea also. There's that background sound of something going on outside, but you don't really know what it is. You can feel some people are leaving outside, or like they're leaving there somewhere. And when the red filter comes, that sound is muted, and then it's like going in, like inwards again. So yeah, I think it's also in the frame itself, the 4:3, like the square frame, also add to that sense of, I mean, the framing of every image. I think that was really also something that I thought about a lot while filming, just for those hands to also be trapped. And then while projecting on the big screen, I just wanted them to kind of like, develop that kind of language amongst each other and like talking to one another, but also that it would become one and only space. While you definitely can tell that it's different apartments and different hands, but then that sense of identity of like would be taken away, and that would just be all of those hands doing those actions, which sometimes are full of care and love, but also very ambiguous, and then that would create a sense of tension or unease in a way. Yeah, but I think the frame itself is also, everything is within the frame, and that adds to, it's quite a close-up shot of everything. So that adds to the sense of like being imprisoned within something or a space, I guess.
I mean, maybe like we can talk about shooting the film in the middle of all of this. I mean, I think it's one of the very few films I've seen recently which was actually conceived, shot, and edited in the past year. I think most of like the recent films that I've seen maybe have been finished during the pandemic, but were shot before or like started before. And I mean, and there are loads of windows in your film, and it almost feels now like the summer was this window that like to this window of pseudo normal life, and this window for you to shoot the film. But I mean, even though it is, there is that like violence, and it's dealing with like a very serious subject. I mean, I think the film is filled with hope as well, and also like hope in terms of like the resilience of artists and the resilience of film and and maybe this idea of flowers blooming, maybe it's also like a sense of resilience, the sense that things can still grow, and that filmmakers can still make films, and that like there is this pushing through. But I don't know if I'm just like being too romantic and idealistic, like because of my current state of being trapped in lockdown London again. But I mean, I think I find it extremely moving just to imagine that like you were able to make this very beautiful film in 2020.
No, for me, it was really a great actually gift to be able to make this work during the pandemic. I mean, just because then during the first lockdown, I had the chance to really think about what I wanted to film. And I mean, the film was really done within 2 months, I think, just the summer, because I had very little time to film in between the two lockdowns. And then the process of making actually this work was very enjoyable, despite the difficult topic, just because it gave me the opportunity to actually spend time with all of my friends, and also to work with all of my friends. And I think that has made me, I mean, even if these times are very strange and difficult, I think for me it has been a very important time to realize what really also matters and what doesn't, and what I value the most. And I think while making this work, it also made me realize I just actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in Korea doing a residency, and I came back from the residency and couldn't go back to it because of the first pandemic. And so it made me realize how much also I enjoyed making work at home. I didn't need to be anywhere else. And I think actually, I mean, maybe it's a bit strange, but I quite like this work. And I think this short work is going to be an important work for me, or like in my practice in general. And I really enjoy making it. And it was a very small, it was a small budget, and it was made very fast. And it made me understand that I'm fine with working with a small budget, and I'm fine working with a tiny camera. And I really enjoy working and making films with my friends. So yeah, I hope that's going to happen again in the future. And also, yeah, I mean, really the whole process was actually great to also have all of this restriction actually and still be able to make something.
Well, but because you like to work with restrictions, I guess then here you had like your usual self-imposed restrictions of working with like analog film and color codes and the choreography of gestures and then the huge restrictions of the situation. But I think we really feel the urgency. I mean, I guess there is the urgency because of the subject matter and I guess and the urgency of the overall campaign that the film, is part of. But then maybe there is that urgency as well for you to like use those months of like light and warmth and friendship to be able to make the film. I think we're like getting towards the end, but I wanted to ask you about that the shot where we get very close to seeing you, and we see a reflection of your face. I mean, we don't get to see your face because your hand is covering it, and that's like I guess that's the one shot where we get closer to seeing someone's face and it's you. I mean, obviously the viewer wouldn't necessarily maybe know that it's you, but you've decided to put yourself in that situation, and it's a shot that comes towards the end, and there is and is very different to all the others. And I don't know if you would want to talk about it.
Yeah, when I was actually making the film, I decided I would also, as a technical challenge, I would like to work with over a double exposure with the Bolex. And I wanted to make all of those portraits of every person that I would film. But again, that was very important for me that you would not see their face. So we worked on those kind of like portraits in order for nobody to be recognizable, because I didn't want any personification, and obviously because of the subject matter of the film. And at the end, I felt like, okay, well, those portraits are not part of this film. I mean, it just doesn't work. But it was kind of important for me. I mean, that image it's also for me a bit of that symbol of like also disappearing gradually, which to me, in a sense, that's what that repetition of And also the lockdown. I think it just that was an image which was quite important for me, and that represented many things. And I kind of felt that was important for it to be there. But then I decided to leave my portrait because I felt that was also more fair towards the people that I filmed. And then also because that was the one which was the less recognizable. I don't really know.
But it's like also such an ambiguous gesture again, because you're like hiding your face, you're holding your face, you're touching your face, you're like protecting. I mean, it is that hand that it has so many different interpretations. Yeah. And I think, as you were saying, that's the thing with the repetition of gestures. The same gesture is read differently at different points of the film, when we first see it, and then when we see it again, and then every time we see it again, it acquires maybe like a darker or maybe not like significance.
Yeah, for me, I think it was also just because there's like all of those gestures, at some point it was important to Yeah, but I think that's very much how I work. That it's like to have those kind of the notion of like what we know and what we perceive, and then I like to implement those kind of rules. Or like I feel like there's there's something very similar with like filming and translating, or like and there's that that I did at some point when. It's like to play with the film itself, to insert something which should maybe not be there. Just it's not to play with the audience, but there's that thing of like, I cannot truly explain. It's just like inserting that image in order to disturb the order of the film.
So that it's not I mean, I guess that's the case in some of your, in your earlier work as well. I mean, there is this sense that there is this rigid structure, and then you do things to show that actually there isn't.
There isn't, yeah.
And that there is something more sensual or sensuous, or like, I mean, it is, as you were saying, it's like about feeling rather than about like math. It's not math, or it's not a structural film, or it's not rigid.
Yeah, but I think that it's like, again, it's like that duality of like, there's an ambiguity in the editing as well, because then there's that search for structure and for codes and for rules, and then there's also that thing that at some point, and it doesn't really matter, because the feeling or the timing, the internal timing, will take over, and then will be respected at the end. So I think that's why that image is still there, and
because you use color a lot in your work. As like a structuring device, or and I guess here the use of red would appear to be more explicit or more symbolic, or I mean it's working within the traditional associations of red as passion and violence and blood, but then I hadn't realized that you were working within a subtle palette of reds, and you talk about like the process of making all those different filters. And do you see them as having different meaning, or like each one like a particular?
Well, the idea is just because lately I've been, I'm strongly influenced by color and light in general. That's something that does fascinate me a lot. And then the idea of the film at the beginning was also that relationship to color and emotion, or the intensity of a color could trigger or incite like a different kind of emotion. So I wanted to see, to also gradually work with filters which would become darker and darker and then maybe cancel the image. But that was something that I'd never done before. So it was very much of an experimentation in itself, which didn't really work because there's so little actually. At the end, you don't really see the difference of the filters. And maybe now in the film, there's 7 different shades of red because of the light and because, of many different reasons. I mean, you cannot really see the difference so much.
But maybe you feel it. Maybe I couldn't see it, but maybe I felt it.
I think on the spinning top especially, it's like a different kind of red going behind the lens. So the intensity of the red is different. I think it's still there, but not as it was supposed to be in a sense. But that's also fine, because I think that's very much the way I work. Or many people work. I plan things and they don't go according to plan, and then it becomes something else, and I welcome that, because actually I think this is great. If I knew what I would be doing before doing it, I'm not quite sure that would be so interesting. So it is also what is great about making films. It's like nothing goes to plan, but then something else happens. But it was interesting to work with those colors, and I'm sure that's something that will, happen with the future project as well.